Okay, so I think it has begun. Thank you so much for joining me today, Leslie. Yeah, so this is the very first official episode of the Lost and Found podcast. So thank you for being my first ever guest. I really appreciate it. You were actually the first one who responded to me. I sent out a whole bunch of emails to different people, and you like responded right away.
Oh, I'm
Um,
honored, Justine.
so yeah, I thought we could start off first by talking about how we actually got to know each other. So it's very briefly, I was in one of your classes for the New York Botanical Garden uh, certificate program, and ooh, I don't know if that was on my end. Okay.
And
Oh. Yeah, so I took one of your classes and instantly I could tell, how invested and like passionate you were about what you do and stuff. Not only teaching, but also, just like horticulture and all that stuff. So I thought that maybe I could ask you to talk a little bit about what you do. You can mention all the things that you've done and stuff like that, but your overall kind of, I guess, yeah, what you do right now.
well, right now, I teach several classes at the New York Botanical Garden, all of them on Zoom. So I'm teaching Introduction to Plant Science. I'm teaching plant morphology for botanical artists. And then I think I'll be teaching plant diversity. But I started at the Botanical Garden after I retired from teaching middle school science for many years. And I had always, my two gods are science and art. I just love, love them. And I see connections between them everywhere.
Mhm.
I see that, the beauty of living things and the miracle of living things. So when I retired from teaching middle school, I decided I wanted to learn how to draw
Mhm.
and paint flowers and plants and animals. So I enrolled in the certificate program for botanical illustration at the New York Botanical Garden. And I'd been there maybe a year taking different classes when one of the teachers, Dick Rao, who at that point was probably in his early 90s, didn't want to teach plant morphology for botanical artists in Midtown in the city because he lived in Connecticut.
Mhm.
And so they were looking for someone to teach that. And they knew I had a science background. And so they asked me to teach it. And I said, wow, great. And so I became an instructor at the garden in person. And then I taught some other things. I taught a class about the birds of New York City. And then they asked me to teach Introduction to Plant Science. And then the pandemic happened and everything went online
Mhm.
with the invention of Zoom. Love
Mhm.
teaching on Zoom. I love teaching in my own home, and I feel it's a much more intimate relationship with my students. We can all see each other and share things, and so that's what I'm doing now. And
Mhm.
let's see, what else am I doing? I have a few books published about the natural world of New York City, and I just finished my fifth called River.
Wow.
Living on the Hudson, a Natural History. Because for almost 40 years, my husband and I and our son was born there, lived on a houseboat on the
Oh,
Hudson
wow.
River. Oh, you didn't know that?
No, I don't think I knew that, no.
So we lived at the 79th Street Boat Basin.
Hmm.
I moved there in 1975 as a young single woman. I met my husband there who lived on the boat next door.
Aw.
Then we had our baby, Jonah, and he was born in 1980. And then we lived there until we were in our late 60s when I needed to be on terra firma. My balance started going a little bit off, and the rocking of the boat wasn't great.
Mhm.
And so then we moved to land. Um,
Wow.
But it's because of living on the river that and nature has always been so important to me. So
Mhm.
living on the Hudson and having, the Upper West Side right there,
Mhm.
which is where I was born, was heaven for me,
Yeah.
and it inspired me to become a naturalist, um, to become a teacher of science, and to become an author on field guides to the natural world of New York City.
Mhm. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I don't think I knew that you lived on a boat. Wow, that's really that's something. So yeah, so I was wondering, so this is obviously a podcast about kind of trying to pursue your interests and stuff, and like, it's clear that you are very, very passionate about all this stuff. So I was wondering, what your earliest memory was about this passion, about this interest. If you can name a specific memory, or if you just kind of always gravitated towards nature and art and all that.
Well, when I was 4, we moved we'd been living in Riverdale after I was born. Um, I was born on West 73rd Street at the end of World War II. And then, and then we got an apartment in Riverdale where I lived for 4 years. I don't have many memories of that. Mostly it's around my parents. But then we moved to this guest house of an estate on the Palisades in
Mhm.
Englewood Cliffs. I can actually, from my window now in Riverdale, I can see it. I can
Wow.
see where we lived. But they hadn't put in the Palisade Parkway yet. And there were all these estates along the Palisades. And one of the estate owners rented out his little guest house. I don't know if it was the gardener's house or, it was like a tiny 2-bedroom house perched right on the cliff. I mean, from my bedroom window, I could see the George Washington Bridge and I could see the Hudson River and I could
Nice.
see the city. And the Hudson River, oh, it was so beautiful. I remember when the sun would shine on it, it looked like diamonds glittering on the river. I remember that my bedroom window faced east, and I remember the colors of dawn. The beautiful, the dark blue to the lighter blue and yellow and orange and pink, and oh, and we lived on this estate where there were woods, and I loved seeing all the animals. And I would garden with my father, and see butterflies, and that's when I first remember falling in love with nature.
Mhm.
And then we had to move because they were going to tear down the estate and
Oh,
build the
wow.
Palisade Interstate Parkway. And so we moved to Forest Hills, to Queens. And I remember, I got an allowance for doing chores, and I was 5 or 6, and um, going to Woolworths, which was, I don't know if there are any Woolworths left in this world, but um,
My mom always mentions Woolworth, so I have heard of them, yeah.
okay, so it was all on one floor, and it was all the little things that you might need in your home.
Mhm.
And one thing that they sold were packets of seeds with beautiful artwork on the packets of what the flowers would look like. And I loved just spending time looking at these seed packets. So I brought some home one day, and I said to my mom that I wanted to grow some plants. And
Mhm.
she loved plants, but her plants were all inside. They were all house plants. And we lived in an apartment house, and there was a little backyard, and the dirt was compacted and it was weedy. And she didn't help me. She just gave me a spoon. She gave me a cup of water, and she said, "Just go out, dig a hole, put the seeds in, and pour in the water, and they'll grow." So I went out and I dug into the compacted soil, and I put the seeds, I poured the water, and I would go once a week and water it, and look, nothing ever came up. So I gave up. But then when I met my husband and we became a couple, his father had been a gardener in California,
Oh,
and
wow.
and so he knew a lot about planting and plants. And he had worked. He and all of his brothers and his sister worked with his father after school and on
Mhm.
weekends. And so, and my husband's also a biologist. So anyway, he built me containers, raised boxes on the deck of our boat.
Mhm.
He got all the different components of soil and bone meal um, and put it all together. And the first thing we planted was sunflower seeds, and we had
Wow.
gigantic sunflowers on the boat.
Oh my goodness.
And then from there, I just took over and
Mhm.
I planted everything, and beautiful flowers and climbing vines. And um, back then, a lot of people had gardens on their boats, or they had gardens on the dock. They had planters on the docks,
Mhm.
and the whole boat basin would be in bloom in the summer. But
Wow.
anyway, that's the story of how I started, falling in love with plants. And um,
That sounds amazing. If you have any photos or anything like that, I'd love to see them because I could only imagine.
tons of photos, tons of photos. And I had to put them together for my book on the Hudson, so I have
Mhm.
them. I have easy access to them now.
Mhm. Wow. That sounds so magical. That's I don't know, it just sounds like it's out of a
Right.
storybook.
It was magical.
Mhm. So again, clearly, this is your passion and stuff. And so a question that kind of comes into mind a lot of times when thinking about, for anybody of any age, we're always asked like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up and stuff like that. And kids say like, astronaut or maybe veterinarian or whatever because that's stuff that they're interested in. And then at a certain point, maybe reality kind of starts to set in and you know other people tell you, oh no, you should go into the things with huge paychecks or this or that and stuff like that. And so then maybe our passions and interests kind of start to get lost. um, and I feel like that kind of is the case with a lot of people that I've come across is that they're in these jobs that maybe they're okay with, they can deal with them and stuff. But they don't really feel passionate about them. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on following your passions to create a career. Do you think that passion and purpose possibly are intertwined? Do you think that it's a good idea for everyone to follow their
What do you mean
passion?
by passion and purpose?
So passion meaning like, your interest in something that you really love,
Right.
and purpose sometimes I think can be combined with that as in like, oh, what's my purpose in life? Is it to, help people? Is it to, discover the cure for something, something like that. So I'm wondering if you think that they're the same thing, if they're the same thing to you, and if
They're
you
not
think that
the same.
people should kind of gravitate towards following both of those or maybe not?
Well, I'm a very late bloomer. It wasn't until, I guess, well, when our son was born in 1980, I was what, 35, right? And and I hadn't really found myself yet, and it was a source of, of pain.
Mhm.
I knew there was something that I had to offer, and it was just a driving force. And I, when Jonah was born, I remembered that the one thing I wanted to be when I was little was a teacher,
Mhm.
and I loved school, and I loved learning, and so I went back to school and I finished college. I hadn't finished college. I left college early because I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I left college in the middle of my junior year, and in the early 1960s. And then, so when Jonah was born, I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be with children, and that I wanted to teach and spend my days with children. So I went back to school and I finished my bachelor's. And then I went to Bank Street College of Education and got a master's in early childhood education.
Mhm.
And then I started teaching in at the 92nd Street Y Nursery School. And then I taught at the Heschel School for a year because the head of the 92nd Street Y Nursery School, Rowana Sharovsky, got a job as the head of Heschel and brought me with her. And then I left there and I went to the Calhoun School on West 74th Street. I mean, everything was in walking distance. Well, the Y was, a bus ride across town.
Mhm.
But oh, I loved it, loved it, loved it. And so I did that for 10 years. And then I realized that I was always bringing animals and plants and seeds into
Mhm.
the classroom. And I was always taking my student, Calhoun, it was so easy to take my students either Central Park or Riverside Park
Mhm.
and, collect seeds and germinate them and grow a whole vegetable garden in our classroom. And then I thought, wow, I really want to teach science. So I loved animals, and I had so many animals in my classroom then. So I went back to school and got my doctorate in science education at Teachers College at Columbia. And then I got a job as a middle school science teacher um, in Englewood, New Jersey. So it's like full circle
Yeah.
uh, at this wonderful school, the Elizabeth Morrow School. And it was 14 acres, and they had a garden. They had a vegetable garden. They had a stream. Um, they built a special room for me. They built a room with like a greenhouse and with a pond. I helped design it.
Wow.
And at one point, I had 70 animals in my classroom because I was teaching evolution of vertebrate animals.
Mhm.
And so I decided to collect them. I had fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And mostly they were pets that people didn't want anymore. So
Wow.
I had an African gray parrot, and I had a cockatiel, and I had um, 5 different kinds of snakes, and turtles, and tortoises. And I had a ferret named Beyonce by her owner, and and I had chinchillas who gave birth. So I had baby chinchillas. I had rabbits. I had a rabbit who was rescued from someone's garage, and it turned out she was pregnant and gave birth in the classroom to these
Oh my
baby
god.
bunnies. Um, it was just, ugh. And then they let me bring my dog to school. So it was just wonderful experience. Oh, and I got to teach about the Hudson River, and I would bring
Mhm.
my children down to the Englewood Boat Basin, and we'd go seining in the river and explore all the fish and the crabs and the shrimp, and so it was a really wonderful time.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, again, that sounds like, out of a storybook. That's amazing. Um, so I was wondering, it does seem like, your passions and stuff sort of came back around, but you mentioned that at one point it was a source of pain for you to, feel like you knew that you could do something else, but you just couldn't really figure it out. I think that's definitely a common struggle. I know that I've definitely felt that. So I'm wondering kind of how you dealt with it, if you remember any specific instances or anything that you tried to do at that time to like
Yeah,
try to find yourself.
I do.
Yeah.
When my son was about 2 or 3, so 1982 and 1983, I was walking our dogs around the ball field in Riverside Park next to the boat basin. And every morning, my neighbor Werner Burer, who had an 80-year-old parrot named Bobo, would give me leftover seed because Bobo was a picky eater. And I would walk around the ball field and I'd throw the seed out. And I didn't know the names of any of the birds except, pigeons and sparrows.
Mhm.
And birds started coming and eating the seed. And one day, this beautiful little bird, um, about, I don't know, about this big, maybe 7 inches, with a red crest and a red beak and kind of a brown body, started following me. She was just beautiful, and she would follow me. I would walk the dogs in the morning and the afternoon, and my husband Jim would walk them at night. And so she followed me every day in the morning walks and the afternoon walks for 3 years.
Wow.
She would sit on the railing, and if she knew where my boat was, I guess she would watch me go home. And she would sit on the railing at sunup and call, zip, 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 which is the cardinal's call.
Mhm.
And I would bring food out to her. And then one day I was coming home from the 92nd Street Y. It was a blizzard, and we all left school early. And as I rounded the traffic circle on my way to the boat, she flew out of the storm. She
Mm.
flew out on the West Side Highway to me. And I went home and I got seeds. And but then I was buying bags and bags of sunflower seeds. And
Mhm.
I moved the snow away from the base of a tree. And all these birds came down with her and ate. About a week into her first visit, I borrowed a field guide to birds, to North American birds, from a friend. I had never heard of field guides. I didn't own any. And I identified her as a northern cardinal, a
Mhm.
female cardinal. And then I thought, wow, I can learn the names of everything around me just by using field guides. So I became obsessed, and I started taking classes at the Museum of Natural History, um, or taking classes with the Audubon Society or
Mhm.
the Gardens Club, and learning about um, the trees and the fish that swam by and all the plants. It was very important for me to not only learn the names, but like the natural history of all these living things around me. And I
Mhm.
started posting photos and text about these plants and animals on the gates of the boat basin, so
Mm.
that passersby could learn about them too, right?
Wow.
And then, so this was in, I don't know, the late 80s, maybe. One of my neighbors um, decided to create a website about the Upper West Side, and he devoted a page of the website to my work, and we called it the City Naturalist.
Mm.
And then, I don't know, about 5 or 10 years later, this editor at Johns Hopkins University Press had thought it would be good to find someone to write a book about the natural world of New York City. And so he did a search, an internet search, and my name popped up right away with the City Naturalist, right? So out
Wow.
of the blue, he emailed me and said, might you be interested in writing a book? And I've always wanted to write a book. I mean, that's the other thing I wanted to be, was a writer when I was a little girl. I was
Mhm.
always writing poetry and little stories. And so that was the beginning of my life as an author.
Mhm.
And I did 4 books with them, with Johns Hopkins. And now this book is with Cornell University Press, the book on the Hudson.
Mhm.
So
So
that's
it's
another purpose and another passion.
yeah, and it seems like all of these, passions, I guess, of yours, you always had them, but maybe they didn't how do I say this? I guess they kind of just came to you, right? Because you were keeping an open mind and you know an open heart in a way too. So I think there's definitely something to be said about that because I come across a lot of people, friends and coworkers who, like I was mentioning, they have these interests and stuff, but they almost kind of lose hope in them and
Yeah.
they almost, kind of close themselves off to anything. And I feel like I've seen, not with people I know all the time, but sometimes just, people that maybe I watch on TV or whatever. And now you, it seems like as well. It seems like, we kind of all go through stuff like that, but then the people who keep that open mind and they don't let themselves lose their hope, it almost seems like things kind of work out, in their favor. Would you say that that's true? That
It's
keeping that open mind.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
Keeping an open mind and just letting your creativity flow. I mean, the idea of putting photographs on the gate to the boat basin came to me in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
I just woke up with it. It wasn't a dream. I just woke up with this idea, like, oh, I could help teach other people about what's around, open their eyes. Because
Mhm.
I'll tell you that learning about um, the natural world gives me the greatest joy.
Mhm.
And so I guess if people can find out what their greatest joy is and then find a way to share it,
Mhm.
that is where all my ideas have come from,
Yeah.
is finding a way to share what gives me joy. And it's interesting, I haven't thought of this before, but once you find ways to share it, then people say, "Hey, I'd love to be part of that," or "I'd
Mhm.
love to help you." Um, and and so you make all these connections and you start to network, and
Mhm.
you find that, people love sharing your ideas or sharing what gives you joy.
Mhm. I mean, it's really something because, yeah, I think that a lot of people have little ideas sometimes, from time to time, they'll think of something that they're like, "Oh, this would be a great idea." But then, in a couple hours or the next day, they're like, "Never mind, I can't do that." It
Yeah,
would never work.
yeah,
So,
they stop themselves.
yeah, what do you think is the difference between, you who had these ideas and you didn't stop yourself and people who let that voice in their head tell them no?
I don't know. I'm just optimistic. I
Mhm.
just can't help it. I can't help it. I've always been optimistic, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if it comes from the way you're treated by your family or the time you're born in or just sheer luck or it's genetics. I have no idea.
Mhm.
But if you're an optimistic person, you're very fortunate. I mean, even you coming up with this idea to do this podcast and find out what drives people um, to find their passion and make their contribution to the world.
Mhm.
I don't know anyone else who's done that, so bravo.
Thank you. But I
Right.
mean, even for me, I like, even the past couple days, I'm like, why am I doing this? This is so silly. Like, no,
People,
everyone who's saying yes is probably just, they're just, doing it to be nice. Like these are the thoughts that, go through people's heads. And I think a lot of times people do listen to those thoughts. And definitely had times in my life where I've had thoughts and I have listened to those no, don't do it, protect yourself kind of thoughts. But I've been trying more and more to kind of ignore that because I know that that's not helpful at all. Like it's part of your brain, I think, that does want to protect you, but it's protecting you from something that is not actually harmful, you know.
yeah, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's just a little kid in us who are all, we're always put down by parents. Don't do that. It's dangerous. Don't try that. I
Mhm.
was listening to Kamala Harris the other night when she was talking about her parents, and her mother would say, "Stay close, don't go far away," and her father would say, "Run, Kamala, run." I mean, that's great.
Mhm.
When I decided, when I first lived on a boat in Sausalito in California, and then I lived out on the West Coast for 4 years in my early 20s, and then I came home. I was very homesick, and I loved it out there. It was life changing. California is so beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, but when I came home, I thought, boy, I'd love to live on a boat again. And I discovered a boat for rent at the boat basin just by sitting in a friend's car and reading the New York Times cover to cover until alternate side of the street parking time had changed, right? I would do
Mhm.
that 3 times a week. And listed in the back of the Times, in the classified, in the real paper, this is 1975, right? I see studio for rent, river view, furnished, 150 a month. So I call up and he says it's a houseboat at the Boatman's. It's way on down the hill because we're living on West 73rd Street again.
Mhm.
And he said, "You're the third person to call and the only person to come down."
Oh,
I
wow.
gave a check for $50 to hold it. And then 2 weeks later, I moved in.
Wow.
And my mother was like, "Oh, you're going to drown. You're going to be attacked. You're going to be robbed. You're going to be mugged." And my father was like, "Hey, it's fantastic. I'm so jealous. What a
Aw.
great way to live in New York City."
Mhm.
So, there's this thing about when we're little that as long we have one parent who says, "Go for it,"
Yeah.
right? So I guess Kamala Harris had a father like that, and I had a father like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I mean, in my family, it's almost the same too. You know, my mom is very careful and stuff and cautious, and my dad is a like total daredevil. Like, you know, when he was little, he would jump from like roof to roof of different houses. Like, he would play tag in front of cars and stuff like that. So it's like two extremes, and I kind of am somewhere in between. You know, I'm also definitely you know, pretty daring, but I probably wouldn't do what he did because I still have, you know, my mom's voice in my head. But I think the balance is good. But I'm wondering too, since you mentioned that, you know, it was kind of that way in your family. Of course, in your mother's case, it was always to, you know, keep you safe and stuff. But I'm wondering if, you know, while you were starting, you know, your career in your passion, if there were other people who or anybody who kind of told you like, "Oh, do you want to wait and think about this?" You know, were there any obstacles like that from people or just obstacles in general that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, even writing these books, I remember with the first book, and my editor was um, Vince, and I lucky had his last name now. It'll come to me. Um, and he said, "Okay, let's get started on this. Send me what you would think would be a good introduction to Field Guide to the Natural World of New York City." So I wrote something. I sent it to him. I emailed it to him. He wrote back, "I hate it." He said, and I thought, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, it's not going to work out. It's not going to work out." But then he came back and he said, "How about this? Try this." And so he was always open to
Mhm,
support and not close the door, but to keep the door open.
mhm.
And then we worked together for 15 years. He was my editor, and then he retired. Um, it's killing me that I can't think of his last name. I'm gonna look it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
Uh, that's the thing about getting old and memory, right? Um, so as long as you have people to not close the door on your
Mhm.
ideas, you're lucky. If you have people to close the door on your ideas, don't give up. Because
Yeah.
then when he retired, and I wanted to write the book about the Hudson, the woman who took his place at Johns Hopkins said, "We're not interested." And so
Wow.
I reached out to an editor at Cornell University Press. So that's the thing. You cannot give up.
Mhm.
Uh, you have to keep trying. And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes years, and so I guess it just has to do with your optimistic side is
Yeah.
to give up.
Yeah. I mean, because that makes me think about how, you know, sometimes and I'll feel this way sometimes. Like, honestly, even today, just now when I had computer troubles and stuff, I was like, maybe this is a sign, like, this is a sign that I shouldn't do this and stuff. But I
Oh,
feel like that does happen a lot. You know, people kind of they like we were saying, they have these fears, and maybe it's like their parents' voices in their heads, or maybe it's other people who told them, you know, "Oh, no, we're not interested," you know. But I think that it is definitely hard to overcome these voices and stuff. But I
very hard, very
yeah,
depressing, and it makes you so it hurts you
yeah,
inside. Um, but then you just I don't know um, how people find the strength to go on, but
mhm,
it's just you have to,
yeah,
and then you
mhm,
feel so good inside that you're making your contribution. I
mhm,
mean, I feel like with this book on the Hudson, I'm having all kinds of doubts about it. Like, it's probably not that good, and people probably won't like it. Um, I know that people are so interested in what it was like to live on a boat on the
yeah,
Hudson River, but it's also about the history of the river itself and the first peoples who lived along it, the Lenape, and then
mhm,
about the animals that live in it, the fish that migrate through, the invertebrates that live in it. Um, so it's about so much more than the boat basin. It was part memoir and part history, but
mhm,
I'm always having self doubts about it. And I realized this morning, well, I had doubts about all my other books too. And then when I look at my other books, I think, well, it's not bad. And
Mhm.
it's helping open people's eyes to what is here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it does seem to be that you really do have to kind of make yourself get over those humps, I guess, and those voices in your head. And I'm wondering, you mentioned your father and you mentioned your editor, and I'm sure your husband also was one of the people who were on your side telling you you should do this. um, how important do you think people like that are, and do you think that if you don't have anyone like that, do you think it's nearly impossible? Because I think a lot of people feel that if they don't have a support system, that their dreams and stuff kind of are impossible.
They're at a terrible disadvantage. It's
Mhm.
true. But then you hear stories about people who, I don't know, were orphans or lived through war or lived through the Holocaust. And um, I have a friend and a neighbor now who lived through the Holocaust
Wow.
and, had a very tough life. Went on to become a physician, went on to become a writer, went
Mhm.
on to become a public speaker. And so just she never gave up. And so it's just finding that strength within you.
Mhm. So you mentioned that you feel like you're providing like this contribution to the world, and that kind of is, I'm sure it's very fulfilling. What impacts do you hope that all of the work that you've done have had on people? From the students you taught to the people who saw those flyers and stuff, and to the people who read your books.
Well, I hope that they'll learn to take joy um, from the natural world around them. I mean, I have to ask you, what did you get from it? From taking this class with me at
Mhm.
the New York Botanical Garden.
I mean, I have to say, when I first was reading the description of the class, I was nervous because I was also, working full time, and I was trying to work and take classes, and I was like, oh, this seems kind of like dense information. I hope that it's not too much and it doesn't get overwhelming for me, coming right after work and then going right into a class. But then as soon as you introduced yourself and everything, and you started teaching us the information, like, it did not seem dense at all. It was very, like, enjoyable to learn, and you set a really good pace and stuff, and I was sad that, of course, at that time with my particular class, you couldn't finish teaching us, but it really did, have an impact on me and the way that I saw, like, all my other classes. I was like, if Leslie was able to provide, this information to us in such a kind of, like, not lighthearted, but, like, understandable and almost artistic way. um I it kind of changed my mindset towards all my other classes, that I was maybe a little bit more nervous about the density of the information. Plus, it kind of helped me to recognize every little plant, because I've always been very interested in plants as well. And it's funny that you mentioned your story with your mom with the seeds, because that is almost an identical story of something that happened with my mom and seeds. um, like with lavender seeds, I was like, I loved seeds when I was little and I loved plants and everything. And my mom was like, okay, let's get some lavender seeds. And then she was like, yeah, just dig a deep hole, dump them all into the hole, cover it up, and sprinkle it with water, and then you'll have lavender. And I'm like, awesome, okay. And I did the same thing that you did. Like, I went out there every day, I checked on them, nothing ever showed up. It wasn't until later that obviously that I learned, that they would never grow there, like in those conditions. But it is funny. It definitely, your class especially sticks out in my mind, as something that kind of maybe reignited my interest in, like, seeing all the, like, tiny details of plants and the intricacies of them, and the beauty and the art that is in nature. So for me, you definitely, like, had a huge impact, and I'm
I
sure that.
forgot. I forgot that I didn't finish teaching your class because I fell on the
Yeah.
steps and broke my ankle. I forgot
Mhm.
about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for you. I was so sad when I heard that happen, when you emailed us and stuff. I mean, of course, another teacher filled in, and she was also, very, very informative and stuff. But Yeah, it was very sad to me. Obviously I was sad for you, but I was also sad that you would no longer be teaching our class. I was like, she was so wonderful.
Oh, no.
But I'm happy you're all better now, I assume.
Oh, yeah,
That was
all
that was
better
like
now.
that was last year.
And I just remember the last name of my editor at
Oh,
Johns
okay.
Hopkins, Vincent Burke,
Mhm,
Burke.
mhm.
And how great he was. My God, I was very lucky to have him. Um, so your question was what I hope people will take away, right? And so
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been an avid reader, and now, just the importance of books to me. That it's like time travel. That you
Mhm,
go into this writer's world, and you see things through their eyes, and so you can be awakened to so many things you wouldn't normally think about. I mean, people, if I would go into Central Park, people would be rushing through or sitting and yakking to someone on a bench. And meanwhile, there's a great blue heron standing a few feet from them, right? I'm like, oh my God, here's this magnificent creature in the middle of New York City. They don't even see it, right? If they would see it, they would be transported.
mhm,
And so that's what I hope to do with my books. It just
mhm.
open people's eyes
Yeah.
to the miracle of all these animals and plants. I mean, in studying about plants, every time I teach, I learn something new. So I've been thinking a lot and looking and reading a lot about orchids. And orchid flowers are these great mimics. And so there's an orchid that has a flower that looks just like a female wasp.
Hmm,
It's hairy in the way, has the same colors, has the same designs as this female wasp. Not
mhm.
only that, it produces the pheromones of the female wasp, the
Wow.
same chemicals, the same scent, the same attractant to bring in the male and
Mhm,
think that he's copulating with a female, right? But mainly, while what he's doing is pollinating the flower.
mhm,
And so these plants, I mean, they are way beyond what we can do. And I was talking about that in this one class recently, and one of my students said, well, they've been around for over 100 million years. And she's right.
mhm. Yeah.
We
We've had all
haven't.
that time. Yeah.
I just hope. I mean, I don't know if we'll be worthy of being around that long if we don't start to take better care of our planet.
Mhm,
Uh, but I'm just blown away by these plants. Absolutely. It's mind boggling.
mhm. So now that you bring up, taking care of the earth and stuff, that's obviously a very, very hot topic nowadays, with climate change and all of that stuff. So I'm curious if any of your work, I assume that, your work as a naturalist and stuff probably has a lot to do with that. But I was wondering if you could speak on your thoughts of all that's going on with the environment.
Well, in writing about the Hudson and living on the Hudson, I mean, when I moved down to the river in 1975, every toilet on the west side from the village up to Inwood, northern Manhattan,
Mhm.
every time you flush, it emptied into the Hudson River.
Wow.
The Hudson River was a sewer.
Mm,
Um, and then with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Environmental Protection Agency being created, with this legislation, every city had to, every place had to build a sewage treatment plant. And so the North River Sewage Treatment Plant was built. And I think it went online, and I think they started building it in the 80s. And then
mhm,
it went online and started operating in the early 90s. And the river started cleaning up. I mean, when I first moved there in the summer, in the hot summer months, when it would be low tide, because the river it's a tidal river, and
mhm,
so at high tide, water comes in from the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and at low tide, it pulled back out, and we'd be sitting on the muck, and it would stink. I
Mm.
mean, it would stink like a sewer. And but then it cleaned up. Oh,
Mhm.
and not only that, it became so polluted. Um, well, the before the Industrial Revolution, before all the millions of people moved to the city, um, there was the largest population of oysters
Mm.
in in New York City than any place in the world. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of oysters that
Mhm.
filtered the river and cleaned the river, and people ate them by the billions and ate them and then polluted the water where they lived. And so there were no more oysters filtering the
Yeah.
water. Um, and then so the river started cleaning up, and all the fish that the native fish that would migrate in every spring left because
Mhm.
it was so polluted. And not only that, all the all the toxins and chemicals that were poured in by the industry up and down the river. I mean, General Electric putting tons of PCBs, and then there was a General Motors car plant in Tarrytown on the river that painted the cars, and then any extra paint they would put into the Hudson. So
Oh
you
my
could
god.
tell the color of the river, what color cars they were painting that day.
Oh.
So after the Clean Water Act, all of that had to stop. Otherwise, well, and they were fined billions of dollars,
Mhm.
and they could go to jail if they didn't, right? There was a birth of the environmental movement in New York State, where the Hudson River Fishermen's Association sued to clean up the river. And then all these other groups, Scenic Hudson, joined in to protect the river. And oh boy, it's made a huge difference. You can swim in the river now.
Mhm.
I started swimming in the river in 1998. And I would test it. I would tested for bacteria before I'd swim. And
Mhm.
I would swim when the tide was coming in from the ocean.
Mhm.
And I would make sure that, there were no dead bodies, there were no
Oh god.
jetsam floating around. And I had a little rope ladder I would attach to a cleat at the end of my dock.
Mhm.
And I tried to always make sure there was a neighbor around in case I got into trouble. And then we got kayaks and we started kayaking on the river. Oh, it was just wonderful. I loved swimming in the river. I'm a swimmer. I swim every day. And now I live in a building in Riverdale. I live on the 23rd floor. I have views of the river and the Palisade. Do you want to see?
Sure, sure.
Turn this around.
Wow. Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
And
Wow.
we're so high up. We
Mhm.
can see from the George Washington Bridge to the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Wow.
And it's really wonderful. And we moved here because this building has an indoor pool. And so
Oh.
I swim year round.
Is it
And
heated? Is
yes,
it
it's heated. Yes,
Oh,
it's
that's awesome.
and then it's surrounded by glass. The pool's surrounded by glass. So the sun comes in, and there's a beautiful garden around it. And I'm on the garden
Wow.
committee, and so it's very nice. It's a very nice place to retire to.
Mhm. That kind of leads me into another question. So it seems like I guess as you followed your passions and stuff, like we were saying before, life sort of kind of unfolded for you, and all these opportunities came about. So I'm wondering how following your passions and saying yes to these opportunities and keeping at it. How do you feel like that influenced you as a person, versus your career, but just you as a person?
Oh, I feel oh gosh,
I know this is a deep question, kind of.
no, it is, but it's so obvious to me because um, I feel so confident. It has helped build confidence within me,
Mhm.
and I feel so good. I mean, I feel like with with my husband, with my son, with my daughter-in-law, with my wonderful granddaughter Aya, um, and then my friends, and my friend Trudy Smoke, who's illustrated several of my books. and is my best friend since we're 19 years old, and her husband Alan, and my neighbors and neighbors from the Bow Basin that I'm still very much in touch with. We have this wonderful world around us, this beautiful, wonderful world, and I feel very good about my life. I don't have any regrets. I mean,
Mhm.
I think if I had one of your questions about would I have would I have chosen differently if I knew as a child what I know today? Um, I did. My parents were not highly educated. You know, they both finished high school, basically.
Mhm.
Um, if I had known that I was going to become a naturalist, I would have. You know, I think I would have been a marine biologist because I love water
Yeah.
and I love the animals that live in the water. I would have traveled more, et cetera, et cetera. But then I wouldn't have met my husband. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have had my family. I wouldn't have had everything I have now. So I think I'm fine with the way things went. And I think it just took me quite a long time, like I said, into my 40s
Mhm.
or 30s to really discover what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have to say that having a child, having this baby, Jonah, that he became a muse. He was a muse, and the cardinal was a muse.
I mean,
It
it
changed my life.
yeah, yeah. It is really, something to me that, you said it did take you a bit longer to, find these things and to actually have these passions really come into their own and like affect your life. Um, do you think that maybe young people nowadays, including me, I know that I'm probably in this category because I think that I've definitely experienced times where I'm like, I feel like I'm behind in a way, if I haven't totally figured out what I wanna do. I see friends becoming, doctors or friends, becoming lawyers and stuff like that, and I'm like, "I'm still kinda trying to figure it out," and it's amazing to me that, you said that it took you into your, 30s, 40s, but I think that a lot of people at a certain age, even if it is, once you are maybe once you hit 30 or something like that, people are like, well, that's it. I'm gonna give up. I tried it. People even say like it's joked about with parents or I guess mostly parents, on TV where they're like, whatever. You have until you're 30 to figure it out, and then you got to get a real job. So what do you like? What are your opinions on all of that?
Oh, it's timeless. It's really timeless. You just live your life and you discover what you want to do, who you want to do it with. And I mean, you know, I just turned 79. You know, I hope I have a while left, but um, but I think at any age, this man I was telling you about, Dick Rao, who taught plant morphology,
Mhm,
for botanical artists, and he was a botanical artist. But he started out; he was a soldier in World War II. I think he was born in the, like 1925, and he was an ad agent. He was art director of an ad agency, and then when he retired in his late 60s or early 70s, he started taking classes at the New York Botanical Garden in botanical illustration. And then he decided he really didn't know much about plants. And so he went back to school at the age of 74. And then he got his doctorate in plant science from Lehman College.
mhm.
And then he taught till he was 98.
Wow.
And he was always learning. I
Yeah.
mean, we as a species are lucky to have a pretty long lifespan, and we can continue to learn and
Mhm,
to share what we learn, which is when you teach, you share what you learn,
mhm.
um, with other people that you love and with your students. So 30 should not be the cutoff. My God, I moved to the Bow Basin when I was 30, and that completely changed my life in
Mhm,
every possible way. Meeting my husband, having our son, discovering that I'm a naturalist. That's where my intelligence really shines. Um, so that all happened after I was 30.
mhm.
How old are you?
I'm 25. I'm almost 26.
You're a baby. How could you give yourself a hard time? And look what you're doing with this podcast. It's great.
Thank
Brilliant.
thank you. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
You're welcome.
It's funny because it's I feel like I know I've kind of mentioned it before, but I don't know. I tend to believe in, kind of things are things that are meant to be sort of happen, as they're meant to. Um, but sometimes I've definitely been known to try to maybe force them or rush them in a way. And with this podcast, I was just outside, kind of, relaxing, like looking at the trees and just, looking at the clouds and the wind and, going through the trees and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, this is nice. And then I thought back to somebody, one of my friends who, you know, kind of I think is also struggling and doesn't really enjoy, what they're doing. And I was thinking to myself, I wish that there was some way that I could help, I guess, because I definitely have felt that too. And like I said, I've come across so many people, like in all of my jobs, pretty much, where I feel like they've kind of lost hope in a way, and they sort of are just, trudging through it and just almost like zoning out in a way, like just kind of going through their life and being like, okay, well, just got to get through work, just got to get through this day, and then finally I can have a couple hours to myself, and well, then I got to start it all over again. And I used to do that in school, actually. Like I loved learning, but I didn't love school because tests and all that homework, it just like gave me so much anxiety. So
Mm.
I tried to kind of rush time in a way, but I tried after I was done with college, I tried to force myself to not be that way, but I still see that there are people who are like that. And so when I was outside, I started thinking about that. And then oddly enough, then I saw a dragonfly. And this sounds like it sounds made up in a way, but so I saw a dragonfly and I was like, I wonder what, I guess not mythologically, but I guess I wonder what legends there are that are surrounding dragonflies, because I was kind of curious. And it basically, in my quick Google search, it said, I think one of the descriptions was like having an open mindset and like being open to change and stuff. And that was like one of the symbolic meanings of the dragonfly. And I'm like, huh, well, this seems kind of like it's meant to be. Maybe I'll try to do this as a
See?
podcast. And so that's why the dragonfly is like the
Wow.
logo.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, so it's funny, and like I said before, I definitely have had so many times. Like I just came back from a little vacation, and I was like, "What am I doing? Why am I doing this?" And so it almost, because you start to kind of get in your own head and feel like, what you're doing is doesn't really make sense and no one's going to care and all of this kind of stuff, so like why am I even wasting my time? It starts to feel like that. And so yeah, it's definitely hard, and I think it is true that you need at least like one person in your life who kind of tells you no, don't listen to that no voice, listen to the yes voice. I think that is definitely very helpful. But yeah, that was kind of the idea that I had to
Well,
like
the dragonfly is your muse,
and it's
right?
funny because there's dragonflies just like hovering around
Yeah.
outside a lot of the time during like 4 or 5 p.m. or something like that. And yeah, it's funny, they were just there.
And it is about change because look at the dragonfly starts off as an egg in the water. It starts off as an aquatic invertebrate, an aquatic insect.
Mhm,
And then it completely changes and it becomes a winged insect of the air. So it
mhm,
lives in two different worlds. And I mean, even more than, let's say, frogs or salamanders that
mhm,
need to go back to the water to lay eggs, that need to keep their skin moist. The dragonfly is then a creature of the air.
mhm.
Um, and so it goes through this incredible metamorphosis or transformation. And so it's a wonderful muse for you. And what you're doing here is you'll be teaching people how other people think and how they've lived their lives and open up all kinds of possibilities for other people. So it's wonderful.
Mhm. That was kind of the idea, and once I saw the dragonfly and decided to look up, the meaning behind it symbolically, and I saw that it kind of meshed with this idea that I had come up with, I was like, "Okay, I feel like I have to do this now," I feel like it's kind of a sign in a way.
It's a
Um,
sign.
yeah, So that kind of leads me to another question about, do you feel like, in your opinion, because I think this is definitely a maybe not a hot button issue exactly, but I think that it could be very divisive. But I'm wondering your thoughts on people following their passions, and if everybody should do this, or if if they have the means, of course, because of course there's a lot of people who would love to, but they just don't have the means at that point in their life. Maybe they're raising a family and they just can't. So I'm talking about people who at this point they can, like, they have that option, because I know there's a lot of people who don't have that option, at certain points. So I'm wondering what your I guess opinion is on that.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Sorry. Your opinion on your opinion on if people should, if everybody, if they have the option, I guess, should try to follow something that they're
Course,
passionate about.
of course, of
Mhm,
course, of course. And even if you don't have the option, I mean, unless you're living in a war-torn zone,
mhm,
if you're living in Ukraine or if you're living in Gaza, I mean, where you have no options, but all you need to do is survive day to day.
yeah,
That's different.
yeah, yeah.
But there are always options, because even if you're raising a family, and you're at home, and when your kids are asleep, you know, there's time to do things. I mean, I was teaching full time and getting my doctorate, and I remember I never felt burdened because I loved doing everything I was doing. So as long as you love what you're doing, it's not a burden. And I think, you should definitely follow your passion, follow your dreams.
Mhm. So I have a couple more questions. I know we hit the hour mark. Is it okay if I ask
That's
a few
fine.
more
I'm
questions?
good.
Okay. So I'm also wondering, for your own life, obviously you've done a lot of things, and you've done a variety of different things. So I'm wondering, what your future goals are, whether that's for life or for work, or both combined.
Oh, well, let's see. So I still have some work to do on this book, but mostly it's out of my hands now, so I don't have to think about that. I still love teaching at the garden.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think my happy day is, I wake up and I read whatever book I'm reading, and I swim in the afternoon. I sit outside in the garden and read some more, and
Hmm.
then I work on whatever project I'm working on. And I love having projects. That's another thing. If I don't have if I don't have a project, I get kind of depressed.
Hmm.
And the thing about this time of my life, though, is that I have limited energy, and ever since my fall in the subway, I don't really take the subway anymore.
Yeah.
And I gave up driving. We gave our car to our son, and so I mostly take Ubers.
Hmm.
I really love going to the ballet. Um, I love TV now. I love wonderful shows and movies, and
Hmm.
that's how, my husband and I have our evening together of, watching and laughing and crying together.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't have any. I don't know what my next thing is.
Hmm.
Oh, yes. So one thing I want to do is get back into drawing.
Okay.
And so now that the book is almost finished, I'm going to start taking classes again in botanical illustration,
Oh,
at
wow.
the garden, and get
Hmm.
back to drawing because I really loved it. But then once I started teaching, I didn't have the time to do it.
Hmm.
Once I got into teaching at the garden, I kind of gave that up. And then working on my Hudson River book, I just didn't have time. But now I'll have time again. And
Hmm.
I find that drawing is very therapeutic.
Hmm.
You're just in the moment, and you're creating something beautiful, and you're looking at something beautiful to copy it. And
Hmm.
so, I guess that's my next big project.
Nice, nice. So it seems like, well, actually, I have two questions now. Are any of the pictures behind you on the wall ones that you've drawn?
Um, so let's see. I don't know if you can see the. the black and white bird in the middle.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yeah, that was from one of my classes. That's a kestrel.
Okay, wow.
It's a small falcon. And that was from one of my classes at the New York Botanical Garden when I was still taking drawing classes. But all of my, when we lived on the boat, we really had no wall space,
Mm-hmm.
just windows all around. So when we decided to move to land, I knew then that I wanted all my walls covered in paintings about the natural world, right? And I wanted all those paintings to be by friends and family because I know a lot of artists. Jim's comes from a family of artists also, and our son is an artist, and my best friend Trudy is an artist, and my friend
Mm-hmm.
Cindy is. Almost all these bird paintings are by Cindy Kane, and so all of the paintings are by people I know,
Mm-hmm.
and and of plants and animals that I love.
That's awesome. And kind of back to what you were mentioning before about the future and stuff. It seems it seems like a lot of your plans are actually based in kind of living in the present. Um, so it's just an interesting thing because I feel like as when people are young, they're always kind of future minded in a way, like even if you're imagining your career and the typical work until you're 60, 65 and then retire, it's all future based, but it seems like maybe the key is really to just kind of live in the present. And it seems like even with your career and it kind of blossoming into all of these different things, it really was based on you living in the present. So I think there's definitely something to be said about that.
Absolutely, I never thought of that before, and that's what gives you so much joy when you're
Mhm.
living in the present.
Yeah.
If you're living in the past or you're living in the future, you're not in the present, and the
Yeah.
present is where everything's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's so much beauty and learning to take place in the present, and
Mhm.
sharing, being with the people you love in the places that you love, and just like you said, sitting outside and watching a dragonfly and being in the present rather than being filled with anxiety, being, "Oh, what am I going to do? Or what did I do in the past that gave me so much pain?" And um, so I think you're absolutely right, Justine. That's brilliant.
I mean, it's definitely a struggle. I think for me, I've always tended to live in the future a bit, and that's why a lot of different things give me anxiety, thinking about the future and like, will everything work out and this and that. But I do know some people who tend to kind of be the opposite and they live in the past and like you were saying, they think about, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't say that. This person probably thinks this of me because I said this way instead of that way. And it's like it's almost a curse in a way because I know that these things are meant to, living in the past or thinking about the past, I would think is meant to, help us learn from mistakes. And then thinking about the future is meant to protect us from danger, but in a way they both kind of also prevent you from living, which, it's interesting and it's difficult to kind of realize that and to try to live in the present.
Yeah,
um,
and the thing is, of course, it's unavoidable
mhm,
because you and it's unavoidable, and it's also helpful. As you said, you learn, you think about something that you did that makes you cringe, but
mhm.
then I'm not going to do that again. I'll
Yeah.
never do that again, and you don't. Thinking about the future, your dreams of what you would like. I mean, I remember by the time I was in high school, I didn't like school anymore. I
Yeah.
loved oh, I remember just daydreaming, looking out the window and
Mhm,
imagining my future, imagining falling in love, imagining being in beautiful places, imagining being famous, imagining all these things. Um, but so that those daydreams can guide you too.
mhm.
That's okay. But once you hit almost 80, you know, I don't know if I'll ever travel again. I didn't travel much in my life, and I really want to go to Venice. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I just see myself there. I think I would have been very happy living in Venice just because it's a city on water,
On the
right?
water, yeah, yeah. It's perfect for you, it seems.
But that's okay. It's all right. I read a lot of books about Venice, and about people who lived in Venice and about the history of Venice. But I probably won't go there because I don't know if I have the energy to get on a plane and travel that many hours. I mean, our last
Yeah.
big trip was to Japan. My husband
Wow.
is Japanese American, and he and I and our son and daughter-in-law and our granddaughter flew there before the pandemic, the year before the pandemic.
Hmm.
And we went to this mountain village where his family was from. And we saw his ancestral home, which
Wow.
is enormous tile roofed farmhouse where his grandfather and his great uncles had a mill. They were builders, they were carpenters, and they built Buddhist temples. And
Wow.
so the history of his family is so rich.
Mm.
Um, and and that was a wonderful, wonderful trip of a lifetime. So
Hmm.
I've been living in the present for a long time, but now even more,
Hmm.
and that's okay. That's
Yeah.
I'm not dreaming about those really about anything anymore.
Hmm. In a way that, I feel like that could also be kind of relaxing because it really does let you truly focus on what is happening now. Um, so I do have one more question,
Okay.
and we've kind of touched on this a bit. So I'm wondering, for those people out there who maybe one day will listen to this, or whomever it might be, um, people who find themselves kind of like feeling lost, what advice might you give to them that maybe you wish that at one point in your life somebody had told you, but you had to learn kind of the hard way? So what advice maybe would you give those people?
Yeah. So when you feel lost, you think like nothing is ever going to change. But just know that change happens all the time, whether you want it or not. Um, and that you can guide those changes. You can make a decision to work at something, to choose a different career, to to, to educate yourself, take classes, um, or you can travel to places you want to learn about. That it's all up to you.
Mhm.
I mean, unless you're living, at a time of terrible of a plague or terrible illness or poverty or war, and God forbid,
Yeah.
unless you're living in to a period like that, you have so many options and
Mhm.
not to give up.
But yeah, so I guess that about wraps it up. Thank
Wonderful.
you so much for being my first ever guest, and for
Oh
for
my God,
dealing with
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed
yeah.
it so much. It's been an honor. Thank you.
I know we had some troubles in the beginning with my audio, but I'm happy that it worked out.
Me
Okay,
too.
so thank you so much. I hope you have a
Welcome.
wonderful rest of your day.
All right. You too, Justine. I'll talk to you later.
Sure. Bye.
Bye.